Don't move. You're safe now," said the Mafia boss as he freed her from his brother's basement. The neon sign of the Eastport diner buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to vibrate right through the soles of Hannah Reed's worn-out sneakers. It was 2 a.m, and the smell of stale coffee and grease clung to her uniform like a second skin. She balanced a tray of dirty plates on one hip, using her free hand to tuck a stray strand of brown hair behind her ear. Every muscle in her body ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, a testament to the double shift she had just pulled after a morning of biology lectures. Hannah dropped the dishes into the bus tub with a clatter that made the line cook jump. She muttered an apology, grabbed her checkbook, and leaned against the stainless steel counter for a fleeting second of rest. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket. The screen was cracked, a spider web of glass over the display, but she could still read the text message she typed out to Sarah, her best friend. "I am so close. Sarah, 2 more semesters, just 2 more. Then I am out of this life of scraping by." She hit send, let out a long breath that puffed her cheeks, and shoved the phone back into her pocket. The manager, a gruff man named Pete, waved her toward the door. "Go on." "Hannah," Pete said, not looking up from his ledger, "you look like you're about to drop dead on my floor, and the insurance won't cover it. Thanks, Pete. See you Tuesday." The night air outside was brisk, carrying the salty tang of the harbor mixed with the exhaust of the city. Hannah pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her chest as she walked to her car, a sedan that had seen better decades, let alone better days. The engine sputtered when she turned the key, a coughing protest that made her stomach tighten with anxiety. She patted the dashboard. "Come on, old girl," she whispered. "Just get me home. Do not give up on me now." The engine caught with a reluctant roar, and she pulled out of the lot. Her apartment was 30 minutes away, on the other side of the industrial district. It was a route she hated, lined with warehouses and empty lots where shadows stretched long and deep. But it was the fastest way home. And tonight, sleep was the only thing on her mind. She was passing the old cannery row when the car lurched, the headlights flickered, dimmed, and then the engine died completely. The silence that followed was heavy and sudden. Hannah steered the rolling vehicle to the shoulder, her heart sinking as the tires crunched over gravel. She turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. "Great," she said aloud, her voice sounding small in the empty car. "Just perfect." She reached for her phone, but the battery icon blinked red and vanished, dead. She let her head fall back against the headrest, closing her eyes against the stinging burn of tears. She could not afford a tow truck. She could barely afford the gas she had just burned. Headlights washed over her rearview mirror, blindingly bright. A large black SUV slowed and pulled up behind her. Hope and fear warred in her chest. It could be help, or it could be trouble. In this part of Eastport, it was usually the latter. A man stepped out of the SUV. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, wearing a leather jacket that looked more expensive than her tuition. He walked to her window, his smile easy, but it did not reach his eyes. "Car trouble?" he asked through the glass. Hannah rolled the window down just an inch. "My phone died. If you could just let me make a call, my roommate can come get me." The man chuckled, a low sound that vibrated with misplaced confidence. "I can do better than that. I am a mechanic. Pop the hood. I will take a look." Hannah hesitated. Her instinct screamed at her to lock the door, but desperation was a loud voice, too. If he could fix it, she could go home. She pulled the latch. The man walked to the front of the car. Hannah watched him through the windshield. He leaned in, fiddled with something, and then waved her over. "It is just a loose connection," he called out. "Come hold this wire for a second." She opened the door and stepped out into the chill. As soon as she reached the front of the car, the man straightened up. He moved with a speed that blurred in her vision. Before she could scream, she felt a sharp prick in her neck. The world tilted sideways. The asphalt rushed up to meet her, but she never hit the ground. Strong arms caught her, and the last thing she heard was the man's voice, devoid of all that earlier charm. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart." When Hannah woke, the darkness was absolute. She blinked, trying to clear the fog in her brain, but her head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton. The smell hit her next, damp earth, mildew, and the metallic scent of rust. She tried to move her hands and found them bound tight, plastic zip ties dug into her wrists, biting into the skin. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She kicked out and a chain rattled. She was on a bare mattress in the center of a large, unfinished basement. The walls were gray concrete, stained with moisture. High up, a single narrow window was painted black, blocking out the world. A bucket sat in the corner. A heavy metal door stood at the top of a short flight of wooden stairs, bolted shut. She tugged at the chain around her ankle. It was bolted to the floor. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and fast. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Someone help me!" The metal door creaked open. Light spilled down the stairs, blinding her. The man from the road descended, his steps slow and deliberate. Marco Valenti. She did not know his name yet, but she would never forget his face. He wore a pristine suit now, no trace of the mechanic act. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking at her with a mixture of amusement and boredom. "Scream all you want," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete. "The nearest neighbor is half a mile away, and the walls are thick." "What do you want?" Hannah asked, pressing her back against the cold wall. "I do not have any money. Please, just let me go." "Money?" Marco laughed, shaking his head. "You think this is about your tips from the diner? No. You are an insurance policy, a little leverage in a business dispute." He stepped closer. Hannah recoiled, curling her knees to her chest. "You have pretty hair," Marco observed, reaching out. His fingers brushed a lock of her hair, possessive and terrifying. "Don't touch me," she shouted, jerking her head away. Marco's face hardened. He withdrew his hand, annoyed. "Do not make this difficult. You stay quiet. You stay alive. My brother gets the message, the rival backs down, and maybe you walk out of here. Maybe." He turned and walked back up the stairs. The lock clicked into place with a sound that felt like a gavel coming down on her life. Hannah was alone in the dark again, the silence pressing in on her ears until she thought she might scream until her throat bled. Across the city, the atmosphere was vastly different. The Onyx Club was a fortress of polished mahogany, low light, and the clink of crystal glasses in the private back room. Enzo Valenti sat at the head of a long table. He was a man who commanded the air around him without raising his voice. His suit was tailored to perfection, dark charcoal, fitting broad shoulders that carried the weight of a criminal empire he was trying to steer into the light. "Gentlemen," Enzo said, his voice smooth but laced with steel, "the construction contracts for the waterfront redevelopment are finalized. That is legitimate income, clean money. That is the future of this family." The men around the table nodded, though some looked restless. They were used to the old ways, protection rackets, smuggling, the quick cash of the street. "We are done with the street-level garbage," Enzo continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "No trafficking, no kidnappings, no heat. The police are looking for a reason to bury us. We will not give them one." He dismissed the meeting with a wave of his hand. As the lieutenants filed out, Enzo remained, pouring himself a glass of water. He rubbed his temples. The transition was harder than he let on. The old guard was stubborn, and his younger brother, Marco, was the worst of them. Through the heavy oak door that had been left slightly ajar, voices drifted in from the hallway. Enzo stopped, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Marco has lost his mind this time." A rough voice whispered, "Yeah, but what are we supposed to do?" The second voice replied, "He brought the girl to the North Heights house. Said she is leverage against the Scalia crew." Enzo set the glass down. It made a sharp click against the wood. "She's just a civilian." The first voice said, "Some waitress. If the boss finds out Marco snatched a nobody and chained her up in the basement, he is going to kill him." Enzo was moving before the sentence was finished. He kicked the door open. Startling the two guards standing in the corridor, they froze, their faces draining of color as they saw the look on Enzo's face. It was not anger. It was something far colder, a glacial fury that terrified them more than shouting ever could. "Where?" Enzo demanded. One word. The guard on the left swallowed hard. The old house. North Heights. Enzo did not wait for another word. He stormed past them, his strides long and purposeful. His head of security, a large man named Dante, jogged to keep up. "Boss, wait, if you go there yourself. It looks like internal war. Let me handle it." "Get out of my way, Dante," Enzo said, not breaking stride. "But Marco has his own guys there. If you walk in—" "I said get out of my way," Enzo roared, the sound echoing through the club's lobby. He pushed through the front doors and into the cool night air. He snatched the keys to the nearest car, his personal sedan, from the valet's hand. He did not wait for backup. He did not wait to formulate a strategy. Marco had crossed the one line Enzo had drawn in permanent ink. Kidnapping an innocent woman? It was sloppy. It was cruel. It was everything Enzo was trying to burn out of the Valenti name. The drive to North Heights took 20 minutes. Enzo made it in 10. He drove with a terrifying precision, weaving through traffic, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. His jaw was set so tight his teeth ached. He had protected Marco for years, cleaned up his messes, paid off his debts. But this was over. He skidded into the driveway of the suburban house. It looked normal from the outside, dark and quiet. 2 of Marco's enforcers were smoking on the porch. They stood up as Enzo slammed his car door, tossing their cigarettes. "Boss?" one of them stammered. Marco said no visitors. Enzo did not stop. He walked up the steps, grabbed the man by the lapels of his jacket, and shoved him over the railing into the bushes. The second guard reached for his waistband, but Enzo fixed him with a stare so lethal the man froze, his hand hovering over his weapon. "Open the door," Enzo said, "or I will bury you right here." The guard scrambled to unlock the front door. Enzo pushed past him into the hallway. The house smelled of stale smoke and neglect. "Marco!" Enzo shouted. His brother appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a silk robe, a drink in his hand. He looked surprised, then annoyed. "Enzo, what are you doing here?" "I am handling business." Enzo ignored him. He heard a sound, a faint, muffled cry coming from beneath the floorboards. He turned toward the door under the staircase. "You have a woman down there?" Enzo asked, his voice deceptively quiet. "She is just insurance." "Enzo, the Scalias need to know we are serious. I grabbed a civilian to show them no one is safe. It is brilliant. It is a death sentence." Enzo snarled. He moved to the basement door. It was locked. He stepped back and kicked it, the wood splintering near the deadbolt. Marco shouted something behind him, but Enzo did not care. He kicked again, harder, putting all his weight behind the blow. The frame gave way, and the door swung open. Banging against the wall, Enzo descended into the darkness. He flipped a switch on the wall, and the single bulb flickered to life. The sight that greeted him made his stomach turn. A young woman was huddled on a filthy mattress. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, her hair matted, her eyes were wide, dilated with pure terror. She was trembling so violently that the chain on her ankle rattled against the floor. When she saw him, she scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner, letting out a whimpering sound that tore at Enzo's chest. "Please," she sobbed, holding her zip-tied hands up as a shield. "Please, do not hurt me." Enzo stopped. The fury that had driven him here evaporated, replaced by a sudden, crushing weight of shame. This was what his family did. This was what his name meant to people. He took a slow breath, forcing his hands to relax. He smoothed the front of his wrinkled suit jacket, trying to look less like a monster and more like a man. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. His voice was deep, rumbling in the small space, but he kept it soft. He moved toward her slowly, telegraphing every motion. She flinched with every step he took. He knelt beside the mattress, ignoring the dirt ruining his trousers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a switchblade. The woman screamed, a short, sharp sound, and squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face away. Enzo froze. "Look at me," he commanded gently. "Look at me." She opened her eyes, tears streaming down her grime-streaked cheeks. "I am going to cut the ties," Enzo said, holding the knife up so she could see it clearly. "That is all. Stay still." He reached out. She was shaking so hard he was afraid he might nick her skin. He slipped the blade between her wrists and the plastic. With a quick, practiced twist, the plastic snapped. Her hands fell to her lap. She rubbed her wrists, staring at him, confused, terrified, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Enzo shifted his attention to the floor. He examined the bolt holding the ankle chain. It was rusted but solid. He could not pick the lock on the cuff. He did not have the tools. He looked around and saw a heavy crowbar leaning against the wall, likely left by the builders years ago. "Cover your face," he told her. He grabbed the crowbar. He jammed the tip into the link closest to the floor bolt and hauled back with all his strength. Metal screeched against metal. A spark flew. He grunted with effort, the veins in his neck standing out. With a loud snap, the rusted link gave way. She was free. Enzo dropped the crowbar. The noise made her jump again. She looked at the open door, then back at him, her chest heaving. She tried to stand, to run, but her legs were numb from hours of being chained. She stumbled, pitching forward. Enzo caught her. His hands gripped her shoulders, firm and steadying. She gasped, her hands flying up to push against his chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of cruelty. She was dizzy, swaying on her feet, panic making her breath come in short, sharp gasps. She looked like she was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Enzo stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. He lowered his head until they were eye level. He needed her to hear him. He needed her to believe him. "Don't move," he whispered, the words heavy with a promise he intended to keep. "You're safe now." The words seemed to hang in the damp air. Hannah stared at him. The man who had burst in like a storm was now looking at her with an intensity that stopped her heart. His eyes were dark, burning with anger, but none of it was directed at her. He swept one arm behind her knees and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. Hannah instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shirt. He smelled of expensive cologne, leather, and rain. It was a stark contrast to the basement's rot. Enzo carried her up the stairs. His grip was secure, like iron, but he held her as if she were made of glass. At the top of the stairs, Marco was waiting. His face was red with rage. "What do you think you are doing?" Marco screamed, blocking the hallway. "You are ruining everything. The Scalias are going to—" Enzo did not stop. He walked right up to his brother. Hannah shrank against Enzo, trembling. Enzo felt her fear, and it stoked the fire in his gut. "Get out of my way, Marco," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "You pick a waitress over your own blood?" Marco spat. Enzo shifted Hannah's weight slightly, making sure she was secure. "You crossed the line. If you ever come near her again, if you ever even look in her direction, I will forget that we share a mother. Do you understand me?" Marco recoiled, the color draining from his face. He had never heard Enzo speak like that. Enzo stepped past him, shoulder checking Marco into the wall. He walked out the front door, down the steps, and into the cool night air. The wind hit Hannah's face, and she let out a sob of relief. Enzo's security detail had arrived. Dante was standing by the car, looking anxious. He opened the back door as Enzo approached. Enzo settled Hannah into the leather seat. He did not let go of her immediately. He brushed a piece of dirt from her cheek, his thumb lingering for a fraction of a second. "We are going to a clinic," he told her. "A private one. No police yet. Just doctors. You need to be checked out." Hannah nodded, unable to speak. She curled into the corner of the seat, pulling her knees up. Enzo slammed the door shut and walked around to the driver's side. He looked back at the house one last time, where Marco was watching from the window. Enzo made a mental note to deal with his brother later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman shivering in his back seat. He started the engine. As they pulled away from the house of horrors, leaving the darkness behind, Hannah watched the back of Enzo's head. She replayed his voice in her mind, over and over, trying to anchor herself to the reality of it. "You're safe now." For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe it might be true. The sterile fluorescent lights of the private clinic hummed with a frequency that seemed to drill directly into Hannah's skull. She sat on the edge of the examination table, her legs dangling, wrapped in a thin paper gown that offered no warmth and even less dignity. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and latex, a sharp contrast to the damp rot of the basement, but her lungs still felt tight, as if she were breathing through a straw. Dr. Evans, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands, finished wrapping a blood pressure cuff around her arm. He worked in silence, checking the bruising on her wrists and the raw, chafed skin around her ankles. He noted the signs of severe dehydration and the tremors that she could not seem to suppress, no matter how hard she clenched her fists. "You are lucky, Miss Reed," the doctor said softly, peeling off his gloves. "No broken bones, no internal bleeding. You are in shock, and your body has taken a beating, but physically, you will recover." Hannah nodded, staring at a crack in the linoleum floor. Recovery felt like a concept from another lifetime. The doctor turned to the counter to scribble on a chart, then glanced toward the door where Enzo Valenti stood. Enzo had not moved since they arrived. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, his dark suit jacket discarded on a plastic chair nearby. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the tense cords of his neck. "I am legally required to report injuries consistent with abduction and restraint," Dr. Evans said, his gaze shifting between Hannah and Enzo. "I can call the police right now. They can have a unit here in 10 minutes. Hannah's head snapped up. Panic flared in her chest, hot and sudden. She looked at Enzo. She knew who he was now, or at least, she knew he was powerful. She knew he was dangerous. She had seen the way the staff at the front desk had straightened their spines when he walked in, how they had ushered her into a room without asking for insurance. If she called the police, would he stop them? Would he hurt her? Was she just trading a cage for a leash? Enzo saw the fear in her eyes. He pushed himself off the wall, but instead of coming closer, he took a deliberate step backward, putting more distance between them. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he was unarmed, showing he was not a threat. "It is your choice, Hannah," Enzo said. His voice was low, devoid of the command she had heard him use on his brother. "Call them, tell them everything, or walk out of that door and never see me again. I will not stop you." Hannah searched his face. She saw the fatigue etched around his eyes, the faint, jagged white scar running along his jawline that she had not noticed in the dark. She looked at the expensive blazer draped over the chair and the smartphone sitting on top of it, the screen lighting up incessantly with silent notifications. He was ignoring a world that clearly demanded his attention, just to stand here and let her decide his fate. He had power, real, terrifying power, but he was giving it to her. "Call them," Hannah whispered, her voice rasping from disuse. Enzo nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Good." When Detectives Morales and Finn arrived 20 minutes later, the air in the small room grew heavy. Morales was a sharp-featured woman who looked like she chewed nails for breakfast, while Finn was younger, softer but with watchful eyes. They took one look at Hannah, then turned their collective glare on Enzo. "Mr. Valenti," Morales said, her tone dripping with suspicion. "I should have known. Whenever there is trouble in Eastport, your name usually floats to the top." Enzo did not flinch. "I am just a concerned citizen today, Detective. I found Miss Reed in distress and brought her to safety. That is all." Morales snorted but turned her attention to Hannah. She pulled up a chair, her demeanor shifting instantly from aggressive to gentle. "Can you tell us what happened, Hannah? Take your time." Hannah took a shaky breath. She gripped the edge of the exam table until her knuckles turned white. She told them about the car breaking down, the black SUV, the man who offered help, the needle, waking up in the dark. She described Marco perfectly, the way he smiled, the coldness in his eyes, the sound of his voice when he told her she was leverage. She described the basement, the smell, the bolt in the floor. "And how did you get out?" Finn asked, pen hovering over his notepad. Hannah paused. She looked past the detectives to Enzo. He was staring at the wall, his face a mask of indifference, waiting for her to damn him. If she told them Enzo Valenti, The notorious crime boss had kicked down the door and threatened his own brother. It would start a war she did not understand. And despite everything, despite the fear that still made her heart hammer against her ribs, she remembered how he had carried her. She remembered him shielding her head as he put her in the car. I do not know exactly. Hannah lied, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. There was shouting upstairs, a crash, the door was open. I just ran. I ran until I saw his car. She gestured vaguely toward Enzo. The detectives exchanged a look. They did not buy it, not entirely, but they had a victim giving a statement. And they had Marco Valenti's description. "We will need you to come down to the station to look at a lineup when you're up to it," Morales said, standing up. She shot Enzo a warning look. "If I find out you are interfering with a witness, Valenti, I will bring the whole department down on you." "Do your job, detective, and find my brother," Enzo replied coolly. "Then we will not have a problem." After the police left, the silence in the room stretched thin. Hannah slid off the table, her legs wobbling. Enzo was there in an instant, his hand hovering near her elbow but not touching her, ready to catch her if she fell. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. "I can have my men take you anywhere. A hotel? A shelter? Your parents?" "No," Hannah said quickly. "My parents are in Ohio. I do not want them to know, not yet. They would just worry." "Then where?" "Home," she said, though the word felt hollow. "I just want to go to my apartment. I want my own bed." Enzo studied her for a moment, looking like he wanted to argue, to tell her it was not safe, but he simply nodded. He pulled his phone from the chair, silenced another call, and typed a quick message. "My driver is outside. He will take you to your door." "Aren't you coming?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Enzo shook his head. "You have had enough of men like me for one lifetime. Hannah, go home. Lock your door. Forget this happened." He turned and walked out before she could answer, his stride long and purposeful, the heavy weight of leadership settling back onto his shoulders as he exited the clinic. Hannah's ride home was a blur of city lights and rain-streaked windows. The driver was silent, professional, and the car was built like a tank. When she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio apartment, her keys rattled in her shaking hands. She practically fell inside, throwing the deadbolt, the chain, and the latch. She collapsed onto her bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The silence of the apartment was different from the silence of the basement. But it was still terrifying. Later that night, unable to sleep, she crept to the window. She peered through the slats of her blinds, looking down at the street. Under the orange glow of the street lamp, a dark sedan was parked 2 houses down. It was idling, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the cold air. 2 men sat inside. She could not see their faces, but she knew they were not police. They were sentinels, Nico and Alessio, Enzo's men. He had not left her alone. The realization sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts comfort and dread. She was being watched by the Mafia, but for the first time since the black SUV had pulled over on that dark road, she felt like nothing could touch her. 3 days passed in a haze of gray anxiety. Hannah tried to return to her routine, but the world felt sharp and dangerous. The sound of a car backfiring made her drop her groceries. The shadow of a coat rack in the hallway made her heart stop. Sleep was the enemy. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the dark, feeling the cold metal of the chain around her ankle. In her nightmares, Marco was always there, laughing. But then the door would burst open, and the voice would come, deep and steady. "Don't move. You're safe now." She would wake up gasping, sweat soaking her sheets, hating that the voice of a crime boss was the only thing that could slow her pulse. She hated that she felt safer in the memory of his arms than she did in her own locked apartment. On the 4th morning, Hannah found a plain white envelope slipped under her door. She stared at it for a long time, holding her breath. Finally, she crouched down and picked it up. It was light. There was no name on the outside. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a sleek, inexpensive burner phone and a single index card. The handwriting was neat, all sharp angles and confident strokes. If you feel unsafe, call this number. Hannah stared at the initial E. Enzo. Anger flushed through her cheeks. Who did he think he was? Inserting himself into her life like this? He was the reason she was in danger in the first place. If his brother wasn't a psychopath, if his family wasn't a criminal empire, she would just be a waitress studying for a biology exam. She marched to the trash can, intending to throw the phone away. She hovered her hand over the bin. She could not do it. The police had given her a card, told her to call 911 if she saw anything suspicious. But the police had taken 20 minutes to get to the clinic. Enzo had torn a door off its hinges to get to her. She hated herself for it, but she shoved the phone into her pocket. It felt heavy against her hip, a solid weight of complications. The evening sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the city. Hannah needed to get out. The walls of her apartment were closing in on her. She decided to make a quick run to the corner store for milk, just to prove to herself that she could. She walked briskly, her eyes darting to every passerby. The street was busy with commuters, which usually made her feel safe, but today the crowd felt suffocating. As she turned the corner back toward her building, she froze. A gray van was parked near the entrance of her apartment complex. It was nondescript, dirty, with rusted wheel wells, but it wasn't the van that made her blood turn to ice. It was the man standing by the rear doors. He was smoking a cigarette, wearing a heavy hooded sweatshirt. When he turned his head to flick the ash, the streetlight caught his profile. He looked exactly like the man who had driven the SUV, the one who had smiled at her before the world went black. One of Marco's men. Hannah ducked into the doorway of a closed bakery, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was here. Marco knew where she lived. The police had said they were looking for him, but he was here, watching her. She fumbled for her own phone, but her fingers were numb, clumsy. Then she remembered the weight in her pocket. She pulled out the burner phone. There was only one number programmed into the contacts. She pressed call. It rang once. "I am here," Enzo's voice answered. No greeting, no hesitation, just immediate presence. Enzo. Hannah gasped, clutching the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "There is a van. Outside my building. I think it is him. Or one of his men. I'm scared." The change in the line was instantaneous. She could hear the rustle of movement, the slam of a car door, the sound of an engine roaring to life. "Where are you right now?" Enzo asked. His voice was calm, but it was a deadly, focused calm. "I am in the doorway of the bakery, 2 doors down from my entrance. I can't go inside. He will see me. Stay there," Enzo commanded. "Do not move. Do not hang up. Keep talking to me. I don't know what to say," Hannah stammered, tears pricking her eyes. "Tell me what you see." Enzo said, "Tell me the color of the van. Tell me the license plate if you can see it. Just focus on my voice." "Hannah, focus on me." "It is gray," she whispered, peeking around the corner. "Rust on the wheels. I can't see the plate. The man. He's wearing a black hoodie. He's looking at my window. He's not going to touch you," Enzo said, the promise vibrating through the phone speaker. "I am 3 minutes away. Nico and Alessio are moving in right now. Do you see the sedan down the street?" Hannah looked past the van. The dark sedan that had been her shadow for days was moving. It rolled slowly down the street, headlights off, creeping like a shark in dark water. "I see them," she breathed. "Good," Enzo said. "I am coming, Hannah. Just hold on." Again, the line remained open. A lifeline of silence and steady breathing, connecting her terror to his protection. And as the sirens of her own panic drowned out the city noise, Hannah realized she had made her choice. She had not called the police. She had called the king of the underworld. And God help her, she knew he was coming. Enzo Valenti arrived at the curb of Hannah's apartment building like a storm contained in a bottle. His black sedan slid silently into place behind the rusted gray van, cutting off its rear exit, while a second car boxed it in from the front. He did not wait for the driver to open his door. Enzo stepped out onto the cracked pavement. the collar of his coat turned up against the biting wind, his eyes scanning the street with the predatory precision of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. His security team moved like oil, fluid and silent. Nico and Alessio, who had been watching from down the block, were already out of their vehicle, hands resting casually near their waistbands, drifting toward the van's driver's side. "Sweep the perimeter," Enzo said, his voice low and clipped. "If anyone is in that van, I want them secured. If it is empty, I want the registration run and the vehicle towed to the impound lot we own in the South District." He did not wait for an acknowledgement. He strode toward the entrance of the building, ignoring the few curious pedestrians who quickened their pace at the sight of the grim-faced men. He keyed the entry code Hannah had texted him only minutes before and pushed into the lobby. It smelled of floor wax and stale cigarette smoke. He took the stairs 2 at a time, bypassing the slow, shuddering elevator. He needed to burn off the adrenaline that had flooded his system the moment he heard the fear in Hannah's voice. He found her in the hallway on the 3rd floor. She was standing outside her door, her back pressed against the peeling beige paint, clutching the burner phone to her chest like a talisman. When she saw him emerge from the stairwell, her shoulders sagged, the tension leaving her body in a rush that made her sway. Enzo stopped 10 feet away. He did not rush her. He did not encroach on her space. He simply stood there, a solid, immovable point in her spinning world. "You are all right," he stated, not asking. Hannah nodded, taking a ragged breath. She pushed a trembling hand through her hair. "I think so. I saw him. Enzo, the man from the road, the one who helped Marco take me." Enzo's jaw tightened until a muscle feathered beneath the skin. "We are checking the van now. If he is there, he will never frighten you again." The anger in his voice was a low rumble, but instead of comforting her, it seemed to snap something inside Hannah. She pushed herself off the wall, her eyes suddenly blazing with a mixture of exhaustion and accusation. "Is this going to be my life now?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Calling one monster to save me from another?" Enzo flinched, the words hitting him harder than a physical blow. Hannah stepped closer, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of furious helplessness. "You stand there in your expensive suit with your private army, acting like a hero," she said, tears welling in her eyes but refusing to fall. "But you are part of the same world that put me in that basement. You are the head of the snake, Enzo. Marco is just the tail. You are the reason people like him think they can do things like this." She was trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer force of her emotions. She waited for him to shout, to intimidate her, to shut her down. Enzo did nothing of the sort. He took the accusation, standing tall and absorbing her anger as if it were his due. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the strength beneath the trauma. She was terrified, yet she stood her ground against a Mafia Don in a dim hallway. It impressed him more than he could say. "You are right," Enzo said quietly. The admission stopped Hannah in her tracks. She blinked, confused. "I am part of this world," he continued, his voice steady and devoid of defensiveness. "My father built this organization on blood and fear. I was born into it. I inherited the sins, the enemies, and the reputation. But I am not my father, and I am certainly not my brother." He took a slow step forward, stopping when he saw her tense. "I have spent the last 5 years trying to steer this family into legitimate business," Enzo said, his eyes intense and pleading for her to understand. "I am trying to cut out the rot. Marco hates me for it because he loves the darkness. He loves the chaos. I do not expect you to forgive me for my last name, Hannah, but you need to know that what happened to you made me sick. It crossed a line I did not think even Marco would cross." Hannah looked at him, searching for the lie, but she found only a burning, genuine fury when he spoke his brother's name. "I am trying to end it," Enzo whispered, "but until I do, you are in the middle of a war you did not ask for." Before Hannah could respond, Nico appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at Enzo and gave a grim nod. "Boss," Nico said. "The van is empty, but the registration traces back to a shell company Marco used for the dockyards last year. It is his They were watching the building. Enzo turned back to Hannah. The softness vanished from his face, replaced by urgent resolve. "You cannot stay here," he said. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. "This is my home. It is the only thing I have left. It is a target," Enzo said bluntly. "If they were watching, they are waiting for an opportunity. I can leave men here, but I cannot guarantee your safety in a building with this many access points. Marco knows you are the loose end that could put him in prison. He will not stop." Hannah looked at her door, then back at the dark stairwell. She felt the walls closing in. The illusion of safety she had tried to build over the last few days shattered completely. "Where would I go?" she asked, her voice small. "I have a safe house," Enzo said. "It is secure, alarmed, private. No one knows about it except me and my head of security. Not even Marco." Hannah hesitated. The idea of going with him, of sinking deeper into his world, made her nausea return. But the thought of staying here, waiting for the man in the hoodie to kick down her door, was worse. She looked at Enzo. He was waiting, not pushing, letting the gravity of the situation speak for itself. "If I go," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to know I can leave. I am not a prisoner, Enzo. If I want to walk out the front door, you have to let me." "I swear it," Enzo said immediately, holding her gaze. "You are a guest. You are under my protection, not my control. You say the word, and I will drive you anywhere you want." Hannah closed her eyes for a second, weighing the lesser of two evils. When she opened them, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Take me there." The safe house was a world away from her cramped studio. It was a penthouse condo in a high-rise building downtown, a place of steel, glass, and modern minimalism. The elevator opened directly into the foyer. Hannah stepped inside, clutching her small duffel bag. The space was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows spanned the entire length of the living area, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was beautiful, breathless, and cold. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress in the sky. She walked to the window, looking down at the grid of streets far below. She felt incredibly small. The height made her dizzy. Or maybe it was just the overwhelming reality of her situation. Enzo locked the elevator behind them and keyed a code into a panel on the wall. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away. "The glass is bulletproof," he said quietly. Hannah let out a humorless laugh. "Of course it is." Enzo gestured to the panel by the door. "The alarm system is military grade, sensors on every window and door, and here." He led her to the hallway, pointing to a keypad. "This engages the internal locks." He walked her to the master bedroom. It was sparse, with a king-sized bed made up in gray linens. On the nightstand, next to a lamp, was a small red button. "This is a panic button," Enzo explained. "If you press this, the local police and my private security team are alerted instantly. The response time is less than 3 minutes. Hannah stared at the button. It was a reminder of the danger, but also a strange comfort. "You take the bedroom," Enzo said. "I will take the couch in the living room. You do not have to stay," Hannah said, turning to face him. "You have an empire to run." "I am not leaving you alone tonight," Enzo said simply. He turned and walked back toward the living area, giving her the privacy she desperately needed. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed. The silence of the high-rise was heavy, insulated from the noise of the city. She felt safe, physically. But inside, she was still screaming. She managed to fall asleep around midnight, exhaustion finally claiming her. But sleep was not a refuge. The dream came fast and hard. She was back in the basement. The smell of mildew filled her nose. The darkness was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She felt the cold metal of the chain biting into her ankle. She heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate. Marco's laugh echoed, bouncing off the concrete walls. "You are leverage, nothing more." She tried to scream, but her mouth was taped shut. She tried to run, but the chain yanked her back, tearing her skin. Hannah woke with a gasp that tore her throat. She sat bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was disoriented, the shadows of the bedroom morphing into the concrete walls of her prison. She scrambled out of bed, her breath coming in short, sharp hyperventilations. She needed light. She needed to escape. She bolted out of the bedroom and into the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. She burst into the living room, blind with panic. Enzo was there. He was sitting on the long leather couch, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light around him. His suit jacket was draped over the armrest, his tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck, and the top buttons of his shirt were open. He was holding a stack of documents, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. At the sound of her running, he dropped the papers and stood up. Hannah froze in the middle of the room, her chest heaving. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She looked at him, wild-eyed, expecting Marco. Enzo did not rush her. He did not grab her. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, showing her he was empty-handed. "Hannah," he said. His voice was low, calm and utterly steady. It cut through the fog of her terror like a beacon. I can't," Hannah gasped, clutching her chest. "I can't breathe." Enzo took a slow step forward, then stopped when she flinched. He stayed where he was, keeping a respectful distance of 5 feet between them. "You are safe," he said softly. "You are having a panic attack." "It is going to pass. I need you to listen to my voice. Can you do that?" Hannah nodded jerkily, tears streaming down her face. "Okay," Enzo said. "We are going to ground you. Tell me 5 things you can see in this room. Right now. Just name them." Hannah looked around frantically. The lamp." "Good," Enzo said. "That is 1. What else?" The window." She gasped. "The city lights. 2. Enzo counted, his tone patient, rhythmic. "Keep going. Your glasses," she whispered. 3. "You are doing great." "Hannah, 2 more." "The rug," she said, looking down. The papers on the table." "Excellent," Enzo said. "Now, I want you to wiggle your toes. Feel the rug under your feet. Is it soft? Is it rough?" "It is soft," Hannah said. Her breathing was starting to slow, the frantic rhythm of her heart easing just a fraction. "Focus on that feeling," Enzo said. "You are here. You are in the penthouse. You are not in the basement. Marco is not here. The door is locked. You are safe." Hannah closed her eyes and took a long, shuddering breath. She felt the thick wool of the rug. She heard the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She smelled the faint scent of Enzo's cologne, cedar and citrus, drifting on the air. When she opened her eyes, the hallucinations of the basement were gone. Only the quiet luxury of the condo remained, and Enzo. He was watching her with an expression of profound gentleness, his dark eyes filled with concern. He looked tired, human, stripped of his armor. "Come sit," he said, gesturing to the far end of the couch. "You do not have to talk. Just sit." Hannah's legs felt like jelly. She walked over on shaky limbs and sank onto the cushions at the opposite end from where he had been sitting. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around her shins. Enzo sat back down, but he turned his body toward her. He did not pick up his papers. He just sat with her, a silent sentinel in the dim light. Outside the massive windows, the city of Eastport sprawled like a glittering map of electricity. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was a companionable silence, a shared space where no explanations were needed. Hannah watched him. She saw the way the light caught the sharp angle of his cheekbone, the weariness and the slope of his shoulders. He was a criminal, yes, but tonight, he was her anchor. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. Enzo looked at her. For a moment, his mask slipped completely. He looked at her not as a victim or a witness or a problem to be solved, but as a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. There was admiration in his gaze, and something else, something hotter, darker, that he quickly tamped down. His eyes dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, a reflexive movement that he corrected instantly. He looked away, toward the window, his jaw tightening as if he were physically restraining himself. "You do not have to thank me for basic decency, Hannah," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It is more than that," Hannah said. She uncurled her legs and placed her feet on the floor. "You stayed. You brought me back. I promised you safety," Enzo said, still looking at the city. "I intend to keep that promise." Hannah stood up. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her drained, but the fear was gone. She felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of gratitude mixed with a confusing pull toward the man sitting before her. She walked toward the hallway, intending to go back to bed. As she passed the coffee table, she hesitated. Enzo looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Hannah." Hannah didn't move. She looked at him. The unbuttoned shirt, the faint stubble on his chin, the sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own. Without letting herself think, without letting the logic of who he was and who she was stop her, she leaned down. She pressed her lips to his cheek. It was meant to be a chaste gesture of thanks. But the moment her lips touched his warm skin, a shockwave went through her. It was electric, a sudden spark of connection that made her breath hitch. She smelled the soap on his skin, felt the tension in the muscle of his jaw. She pulled back quickly, startled by the intensity of the contact. Enzo had gone rigid. He stared up at her, his eyes wide, dark pupils blown. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved, the air between them crackling with a tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with desire. Hannah stammered, her face flushing hot. "Good night, Enzo." She turned and hurried down the hallway, retreating to the safety of the bedroom. She closed the door and leaned against it, her hand coming up to touch her own lips, her heart racing for a completely different reason than before. In the living room, Enzo remained frozen on the couch. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers grazing the spot on his cheek where she had kissed him. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty hallway, the careful control he had maintained for years beginning to fracture under the weight of a single, soft touch. 2 weeks had passed since Hannah walked into the high-rise safe house, and the space had slowly transformed from a fortress of glass and steel into something that resembled a home. The silence that had once been suffocating was now filled with the low hum of routine. Hannah had started therapy, attending sessions via encrypted video calls that Enzo had arranged. He never asked what she discussed, and he paid the bills anonymously, ensuring no paper trail could lead back to her location. The therapy was exhausting. Unpacking the trauma of the basement left her drained, but it also gave her a foothold on her own mind again. She started making lists, simple things at first: shower, eat breakfast, read 10 pages of a book, then more complex tasks: organize the pantry, water the succulents Enzo had bought for the windowsill. Reclaiming these mundane tasks felt like planting flags in the soil of her own life, declaring that she was still here, still functioning, still Hannah. Enzo was a constant, quiet presence in the periphery of her recovery. He spent his days working from the dining table, his phone constantly lighting up with messages he answered with swift, decisive fingers. He left the apartment only when necessary, and never for long. When he was there, he gave her space, yet she always felt the weight of his attention. Not a surveillance, but a protective watchfulness that had ceased to be frightening and had become strangely grounding. One Tuesday evening, the rhythm shifted. Rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city lights of Eastport into smeared streaks of gold and red. Hannah stood in the kitchen, staring at the stack of takeout menus on the counter. Thai, Indian, pizza, sushi. They had cycled through them all. "I cannot eat another container of pad Thai," Hannah announced, turning to face the living room. Enzo looked up from his laptop, blinking as he removed his reading glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture of fatigue that made him look younger, less like the formidable head of the Valenti family. "What do you suggest?" Enzo asked, a faint smile touching his lips. "I can have Alessio make a run to the grocery store if you want something specific." "I do not want Alessio to go," Hannah said, walking over to the island. "I want to cook, real food, and I want you to show me how—" Enzo raised an eyebrow. "You want a cooking lesson from me? You are Italian, aren't you?" Hannah teased, a spark of her old self breaking through the gray haze of trauma. "Do not tell me you do not know how to make a decent pasta sauce." Enzo chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "I can make a sauce. Hannah." My grandmother would rise from her grave and slap me if I couldn't. "Then show me," she challenged. Half an hour later, the sleek, modern kitchen was filled with the rich, savory scent of garlic sizzling in olive oil. Enzo had rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt to his elbows, revealing strong forearms, and tied a dark apron over his trousers. He moved around the kitchen with an efficiency that surprised Hannah, chopping onions with a chef's precision, his movements fluid and practiced. "It is all about the patience," Enzo explained, his voice dropping to a murmur as he stirred the pot. "You cannot rush the tomatoes. You have to let them break down. Let them surrender their sweetness." Hannah stood beside him, tasked with tearing fresh basil leaves. The kitchen was narrow, a galley style designed for aesthetics rather than two people working in tandem. They moved around each other in a delicate dance. When Enzo reached for the salt, his arm brushed against hers. When Hannah turned to grab the pepper grinder, her hip bumped his thigh. Each point of contact sent a jolt of awareness through her. It was not the fear that used to seize her when a man got too close. It was something else, a heat that started in her chest and radiated outward. She watched his hands, large and capable, handling the delicate herbs with surprising tenderness. She was stirring the sauce, lost in thought, when the spoon slipped from her grip. It slapped against the side of the pot, sending a spray of bright red tomato sauce flying. It splattered across the countertop and landed in a distinct, jagged line right across the pristine white front of Enzo's shirt. Hannah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh no, Enzo, I am so sorry." She grabbed a dish towel and instinctively reached out to wipe it off. Enzo looked down at his ruined shirt, then at her horrified expression. To her shock, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a genuine, relaxed sound, free of the tension that usually coiled around him like a snake. "It is just a shirt." "Hannah," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "I have plenty more." He stood still as she dabbed at the stain on his collar. She was focused on the task, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Hold still," she muttered. "If I get cold water on this immediately, it might not set." She rubbed the fabric, her knuckles grazing the warm skin of his neck. Suddenly, the laughter died down. The only sound in the room was the rain drumming against the glass and the soft simmer of the sauce on the stove. Hannah stopped moving. She realized, all at once, how close they were. She was standing between his spread feet, her chest inches from his. His palm was braced on the counter behind her, effectively boxing her in. Though he wasn't touching her, her hand was still resting on his collar. Her fingers curled into the fabric. She looked up. Enzo was watching her. His gaze was dark, intense, searching her face with a hunger he made no move to satisfy. He was waiting. Time seemed to suspend, stretching out into a long, silent beat where the air grew thick and heavy. "Is this okay?" Enzo asked quietly. His voice was rough, stripped of all command. He was giving her the power. Hannah swallowed. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but it wasn't fear. She felt alive. She felt seen. She nodded, yes. Enzo moved slowly. He leaned in by degrees, giving her every second to change her mind, to pull away, to push him back. He tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers until the very last moment. When his lips brushed hers, it was soft, tentative. A question rather than a demand. Hannah let out a shaky breath, her eyes fluttering shut. She leaned into him, closing the final inch of distance. The kiss deepened, slow and lingering. It tasted of wine and unspoken longing. Enzo's hand, the one that had been resting on the counter, moved up. He did not grab her. He gently curled his large hand around the back of her neck, his thumb resting against her pulse point. It was a stabilizing touch, grounding her. Hannah's fingers, still clutching the towel, released it. Her hand slid up his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. She needed to feel his solidity. She needed to know this was real. Enzo groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure want that sent a shiver down her spine. His other hand settled carefully at her waist. He did not squeeze. He simply rested it there, his thumb drawing slow, reassuring circles through her sweater, anchoring her in the present moment. For a minute, there was nothing but the heat of him, the taste of him, the overwhelming relief of being held by someone who would burn the world down to keep her safe. Then, Enzo shifted his weight, pressing her slightly back against the counter. The sensation of being trapped, of being pressed against a hard surface, triggered a flash of memory. The cold concrete wall, the feeling of helplessness, the basement. Hannah's body went rigid. Her breath hitched in a sharp gasp, and she froze. Enzo sensed the change instantly. Before she could even pull away, he was already moving. He broke the kiss and stepped back, creating a foot of space between them in a heartbeat. His hands left her body, hovering in the air, palms open. "Hannah," he said, his voice urgent but soft. She was staring at him, wide-eyed, her chest heaving as the past overlaid the present. I'm sorry," she stammered, shame flooding her face. "I didn't mean to." Enzo stepped in again, but not to kiss her. He rested his forehead gently against hers, closing his eyes. He breathed with her, forcing his own uneven breathing to slow down, willing her to match his rhythm. "Do not apologize," he whispered fiercely against her skin. "Never apologize for that." He waited until he felt her shoulders drop, until the tension began to bleed out of her frame. "We can go as slow as you need," Enzo said, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. "We can stop whenever you want. We never have to do this again if you do not want to. Your safety matters more to me than anything, more than this, more than me." Hannah looked at him, tears stinging her eyes. She saw the truth in his face. He wasn't frustrated. He wasn't angry. He was just concerned. "I don't want to stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. I need time." "You have all the time in the world," Enzo promised. The dinner was forgotten on the stove, turned down to a low, keep-warm setting. They did not eat at the table. Instead, they moved to the large, plush sofa in the living room. Hannah curled up in the corner, and Enzo sat beside her. He extended an arm along the back of the couch, and after a moment of hesitation, she leaned into him. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. He pulled a cashmere throw blanket over them, tucking it around her feet. He put on an old black-and-white movie, something with Cary Grant that was light and charming and far removed from their reality. They lay there, fully clothed, legs tangled comfortably under the blanket. Enzo's hand idly stroked her hair, a rhythmic, soothing motion that made her eyelids heavy. It was intimate in a way that felt deeper than the kiss. It was a declaration of trust. Hannah closed her eyes, and for the first time since the abduction, the nightmares felt like they were kept at bay by the warmth of the man holding her. While Hannah and Enzo found a fragile peace in the tower above the city, the world below was turning darker. In a dimly lit back room of a warehouse in the industrial district, the same district where Hannah's car had broken down, Marco Valenti was holding court, but this was not a family meeting. The men sitting across from him were not Valenti soldiers. They wore the colors of the North Side outfit, the rival gang that had been encroaching on Eastport for years. The leader of the North Side crew, a scarred man named Donnelly, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the rusted table. "You are asking for a lot, Marco." Donnelly grunted. "You want us to hit your own brother? That is a civil war. That is messy. It is necessary." Marco spat, pacing the small room. "Enzo is weak. He's turning the organization into a charity. He's shutting down the trafficking routes, the high-yield operations. He's bad for business, for both of us." "And the girl?" Donnelly asked. Marco stopped pacing, his face twisted into a sneer. "The girl is the nail in his coffin. She can put me away. Enzo is protecting her. If you help me take Enzo out, the territory is yours. I take over the leadership. I give you the shipping lanes you have been begging for, and we share the profits. But the girl dies. She dies before she can talk to a grand jury. Donnelly considered this, lighting a cigarette. He looked at Marco with thinly veiled contempt. But business was business. Done, Donnelly said. We will provide the muscle. You provide the access. The alliance was sealed with a handshake that would stain the streets of Eastport red. 2 days later, the bubble burst. Enzo was in the kitchen making espresso. When his phone rang, it was Nico. Enzo answered on the first ring, his instincts already sharp. Talk to me, boss. We have a problem. Nico's voice was tight, urgent. We got intel from an informant in the North Side outfit. Marco met with Donnelly. They cut a deal. Enzo's grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. What kind of deal? Total removal, Nico said. They are coming for you, and they are coming for Hannah. They know she is the leverage. They want her gone before the pre-trial hearings begin. Enzo hung up the phone slowly. He stared out the window at the gray morning sky. The peace of the last few days evaporated like mist. He had thought he could protect her by hiding her. He had thought he could handle Marco quietly. He was wrong. Marco had escalated this beyond a family dispute. He had brought in outsiders. He had declared war. And as long as Hannah was just a silent victim hiding in a safe house, she was a target. The only way to save her was to make her untouchable, to make her voice so loud that silencing her would bring down the entire state government on Marco's head. Enzo walked into the living room. Hannah was sitting on the rug, organizing a stack of books she had requested. She looked up as he entered, a smile forming on her lips. It faded instantly when she saw his face. "Enzo?" she asked, scrambling to her feet. "What happened?" Enzo stopped in the center of the room. He looked at her hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing one of his oversized sweaters. He felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. "We need to talk," he said, his voice grave. "Sit down, Hannah." They sat on the couch, the same spot where they had cuddled the night before, but now the distance between them felt vast. "Marco has made a move," Enzo began, not sugarcoating it. "He is allied with the North Side outfit. He's coming for me, and he is coming for you." Hannah went pale. But we are safe here." "You said the alarm, the guards. Safe houses are temporary." "Hannah," Enzo said gently, "if they want to get in bad enough, they will. We cannot hide forever." He took a breath, preparing to deliver the hardest news. "There is only one way to end this. Truly end it. You have to testify." Hannah recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Testify? In court? In front of him?" "Yes," Enzo said. "We need to bring this to the district attorney. We need to give them everything, the kidnapping, the basement, the structure of the organization. I will give them the evidence to corroborate your story. I will give them Marco. But that means—" Hannah's voice trembled. "Everyone will know. The press. My parents. Marco will see me." Enzo reached out and took her hands. His grip was firm. "Grounding, I know. It means danger. It means media attention. It might mean you have to relocate after the trial into witness protection. I cannot lie to you about the cost." "Then why?" Hannah cried, pulling her hands away. "Why are you asking me to do this?" "Because as long as you are silent, you are a target," Enzo said intently. "If you testify, you become evidence. You become public. If anything happens to you, then the investigation explodes. It becomes federal. It is the only shield strong enough to stop Marco now." Hannah stood up, walking to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked out at the city she was terrified to walk in. "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "Not turning around, if I testify. If you give them evidence on the organization, what happens to you?" Enzo looked at her back. He had wrestled with this all morning. "If I help you bring down Marco, I have to bring down the family," he said. "I have to implicate myself. I will likely go to prison." "Hannah." Hannah spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" Enzo stood and walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his expression open and raw. "I never wanted this life," he confessed. "I took it because it was my duty. I thought I could change it from the inside, but I was wrong. The rot is too deep." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. When I found you in that basement, something changed. I realized I could not be the man who runs this family and the man who deserves to be in the same room as you, Enzo. Hannah breathed, her heart aching at the look in his eyes. I have feelings for you. Hannah, Enzo said. It is reckless, and it is dangerous, and I have no right to feel them, but I do. What started as a duty to fix my brother's mess has become the only thing that matters to me. I want you to be free. I want you to have a life where you never have to look over your shoulder. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, but he did not touch her. He let his hand drop. If the price of your safety is my freedom, he said, his voice steady with conviction, then I will pay it. Gladly. Hannah stared at him, the weight of his sacrifice crashing into her. He was offering to destroy his own empire, to go to prison, just to give her a chance at a normal life. She saw the love in his eyes, not the possessive, twisted obsession of his brother, but a selfless, burning devotion. The room was silent, save for the hum of the city below, as Hannah Reed realized that the safest place in the world was not a fortress, but standing next to the man who was willing to lose everything to keep her safe. The silence in the penthouse following Enzo's confession was thick enough to choke on, but for Hannah, it was also clarifying. She stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, her reflection ghostly against the backdrop of the city lights. She looked at the man who had saved her, the man who was offering to dismantle his entire life for her, and she felt a steel spine form where fear had once been. She turned to face him. Her hands were shaking, a physical tremor she could not quite suppress, but her voice was steady, resonant with a newfound resolve. I am going to testify. Enzo. Enzo let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He took a step toward her, his dark eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation, but he found none. You are sure? He asked, his voice rough. Once we start this mechanism, Hannah, there is no stopping it. It will be a war. I am sure, she said. I will not let Marco do to someone else what he did to me. I will not live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if a van parked on the street is there to take me away again. I want my life back, and if this is the only way to get it, then I am ready. Pride and fear warred in Enzo's expression. He looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak, a mixture of awe at her bravery and terror for what he was about to put her through. He nodded slowly, accepting her decision as a command. Then we fight, he said, and I will be right there behind you, 2 nights later, under the cover of a moonless sky. Enzo pulled his sedan into a deserted parking lot on the industrial outskirts of Eastport. It was a desolate place, surrounded by chain-link fences and overgrown weeds. A single car was waiting, its engine idling. Detective Morales stepped out of the unmarked vehicle as Enzo approached. She kept her hand near her hip, her posture defensive. She had spent years trying to pin charges on the Valenti family, and now the head of the snake was walking voluntarily toward her. You have 5 minutes, Valenti, Morales said, her voice sharp in the cold air. Make it count. I am not here to play games. Detective, Enzo said, stopping 10 feet away. He kept his hands visible, palms open. I am here to offer you a deal. Morales raised an eyebrow. You? Offering a deal? Usually. It is your lawyers doing the talking while you stonewall us. Times change, Enzo said. I am prepared to give you Marco, not just for the kidnapping, but for everything. The trafficking, the racketeering, the alliance with the Northside outfit. I will give you the dates, the locations, and the financial records. Morales stared at him. Skepticism etched into every line of her face. And why would you do that? You are selling out your own blood. Because he crossed a line, Enzo said, his voice dropping to a low growl. And because I want something in return? Morales laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Here it comes. Immunity? A plane ticket to the Caribbean? Protection, Enzo corrected her. For Hannah Reed, I want her in witness security immediately. I want the highest level of clearance. Safe house, marshals, the works, and I want to guarantee that no matter what happens to me, she is safe." Morales studied him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the desperation that a man like Enzo Valenti never showed. She realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he was serious. "And for yourself?" she asked quietly. Enzo looked at the asphalt, a fair shake. "If I cooperate, if I help you dismantle the syndicate from the inside, I want the district attorney to consider that when sentencing comes down. But Hannah is the priority." Morales was silent for a long moment, weighing the magnitude of the offer. Flipping a mafia boss was a career-defining moment. It was the kind of win that cleaned up a city. "I need proof. Valenti," she said finally. "You give me something actionable on Marco and the Northside crew, and we will talk about witness security for the girl." Enzo reached into his jacket pocket. Morales flinched, her hand tightening on her weapon. Enzo moved slowly, pulling out a flash drive. He tossed it to her. "That is the ledger for the shell company Marco used to buy the van involved in the abduction," Enzo said. "It links him directly to the Northside outfit's money laundering operation." Morales caught the drive, clutching it tight. She looked at Enzo with a new kind of respect, mixed with wariness. "I will make the call," she said. "Get her ready." The transition was abrupt and brutal. The next morning, federal marshals arrived at the penthouse. There were no soft goodbyes, no lingering moments. Hannah was packed into an armored transport and whisked away to an official safe location, a nondescript government facility that smelled of bleach and bureaucracy. It was safer than the penthouse, Enzo had assured her, but it felt colder. Enzo was allowed supervised visits only, a concession Morales had wrung out of the district attorney to keep Enzo cooperating. The meetings took place in a small, windowless room with a metal table bolted to the floor. A marshal stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching every move. Their first reunion in that room was a study in restraint. Enzo sat across from Hannah, his suit perfectly pressed, but his face gaunt. Hannah looked tired, wearing simple clothes provided by the program. They reached across the table, clasping hands tightly. It was the only contact allowed. Enzo's thumb rubbed the back of her hand, a desperate, repetitive motion. "Are they treating you well?" Enzo asked, his voice low. "It is fine," Hannah said, though her eyes said otherwise. "It is lonely. I miss the window. I miss us." Enzo squeezed her hand. "It is not forever. Just until the trial. Just until Marco is gone." But the stress of the situation began to fracture the fragile peace they had built. During a visit 3 days later, the tension boiled over. Hannah had spent 48 hours being prepped by prosecutors who asked invasive, grueling questions. She was raw, on edge, and terrified. When Enzo sat down, looking composed and calm, Hannah felt a spike of irrational anger. "You look like you just came from a board meeting," she snapped, pulling her hands away when he reached for them. "Meanwhile, I am being grilled about every detail of my life. They asked me if I provoked him. Enzo, can you believe that?" Enzo flinched. "They have to build a watertight case. Hannah, they need to know how the defense will attack you." "I know how the defense will attack me," Hannah cried, her voice rising. The marshal in the corner shifted, but did not intervene. "They will say I am just collateral damage in a war you started. And they are right, aren't they?" "Hannah," Enzo warned softly. "Don't Hannah me," she said, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "You sit here and talk about ending it, but you let it get this bad. You let Marco grow into this monster. You were the boss, Enzo. You could have stopped him years ago, but you looked the other way because he was family." The accusation hit its mark. Enzo recoiled, his face paling. He sat back in his metal chair, the space between them suddenly feeling like a canyon. "You are right," he said, his voice hollow. "I did look the other way. I thought I could control him. I thought I could save him from himself. That was my failure, and I will carry the guilt of that for the rest of my life." Hannah saw the pain in his eyes, the deep, ancient weariness, and her anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. She reached out, touching his sleeve. "Enzo, I didn't mean—" "No," Enzo said, shaking his head. "You did, and you should. I am trying to end things now." Hannah, I am trying to burn it all down so you can be safe, but I cannot erase the past. I cannot undo what my name did to you." They sat in silence for the rest of the allotted time, the air thick with things unsaid, leaving them both feeling raw and distant when the marshal finally announced that time was up. The morning of the pre-trial hearing was gray and overcast. The courthouse was a fortress, surrounded by police barricades. Hannah was transported in a convoy of SUVs. Enzo arrived separately, flanked by his own security and a team of plainclothes officers. They met in the rear holding area. Hannah was trembling. Enzo wanted to hold her, to bridge the gap from their argument, but there were too many eyes on them. "Just keep your head down," Enzo told her, his voice tight. "We go in the side entrance. It will be quick." They moved toward the doors, a phalanx of marshals surrounding Hannah. Enzo walked a few paces behind. Just as they reached the steps, chaos erupted. A car screeched around the corner. Ignoring the barricades, automatic gunfire shattered the morning air. It wasn't aimed at them. The shots went high, smashing into the stone facade of the courthouse and shattering windows on the second floor. But the message was clear. It was terror. It was intimidation. "Get down," a marshal screamed. Enzo didn't think. He lunged forward, tackling Hannah to the pavement, covering her body with his own. He pressed her face into the concrete, shielding her head with his hands as debris rained down around them. Hannah screamed, the sound lost in the wail of sirens. She could feel Enzo's heart hammering against her back, his heavy frame a solid wall between her and the bullets. The car peeled away, tires smoking. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. "Move, move," the marshal shouted, hauling them up. They were rushed inside the courthouse, through a labyrinth of corridors, and into a secure holding room. Hannah was hyperventilating, her clothes torn at the knees, dust in her hair. Enzo was bleeding from a small cut on his forehead where he had hit the ground, but he didn't seem to notice. He reached for her. "Hannah, are you hurt? Let me see." "No!" Hannah shouted, pushing him away. She stumbled back, her chest heaving. "Don't touch me!" Enzo froze, his hands hovering in midair. "Hannah." "It never stops." Hannah sobbed, sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. "It is never going to stop. As long as I am near you, I am a target, being with you. It almost got me killed." Enzo stared at her, the blood trickling down his temple. He saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes, and he knew she was right. His presence was a lightning rod. "I can't see you," Hannah whispered, rocking back and forth. "I can't do this. Not right now. I need to get through this testimony. I need to know who I am outside of your protection, outside of your world. Please, Enzo, please just leave me alone." The rejection was a knife in his gut, twisting sharply, but Enzo Valenti loved her enough to let the blade kill him if it meant she survived. He straightened his spine, jaw clenched so tight it hurried. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, Hannah." He looked at the marshal standing by the door. "Watch her. Do not let her out of your sight." He turned back to Hannah one last time. "I will keep working to keep you safe," he promised, "from a distance. You won't see me, but I will be there." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone on the floor, his heart breaking with every step. Enzo threw himself into the work. If he couldn't be her shield, he would be her sword. He met with Nico in the back of a tinted SUV. The air was stale, filled with the tension of men who knew they were walking on a razor's edge. "I need you to wear a wire," Enzo said, handing Nico a small device. Nico looked at it, then at Enzo. "This is suicide, boss. If Marco finds it." "If Marco stays free, Hannah dies," Enzo said, his voice cold and final. "And then I die. We are past the point of no return. Nico, we need him on tape admitting to the shooting. We need him linking himself to the North Side contract." Nico nodded slowly. He pocketed the device. "For the girl?" "For the girl," Enzo confirmed. "And for the family. The real family, not what Marco has turned it into." Nico infiltrated a meeting with the North Side outfit later that afternoon. Enzo sat in a surveillance van blocks away, listening to the static-filled audio feed, his hand hovering over the distress button. He heard Marco's voice, arrogant and loud, bragging about the courthouse shooting, detailing the plan to silence the witness. It was everything they needed. But Marco was not stupid. He had survived this long by being paranoid. The next morning, the feed went dead. Enzo waited, sweat beading on his brow, but Nico did not check in. Instead, the news broke. Marco had discovered the betrayal, but rather than killing Nico immediately, he had decided to burn the whole board. He leaked a tip to the Eastport Gazette. By noon, the story was everywhere. Mystery woman held in mob basement, the secret life of the Valenti family. The report did not name Hannah, but it gave enough details, her age, her job as a waitress, the location of the abduction, that anyone who knew her would figure it out. Marco had painted a target on her back. He had turned a private legal battle into a media circus. Cameras swarmed the courthouse and the safe location where Hannah was being held. The evening news featured a blurred photo of Hannah from her high school yearbook, dug up by relentless reporters. She was no longer a person, she was a symbol, a pawn. That night, at the witness security safe house, Hannah sat in the dark, the blue light of the television flickering on her face. She watched the pundits dissecting her life, speculating on her relationship with the mob boss savior. The footage cut to a clip of Enzo leaving the courthouse earlier that day. He ignored the reporters shouting questions, his face a mask of stone. But in the background of the shot, for just a second, he looked directly at the camera. His eyes were haunted. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Hannah touched the edge of the screen, her finger tracing the line of his jaw. The anger she had felt during the argument, the terror she had felt at the courthouse, it all seemed to fade in the face of his obvious devastation. He was out there, fighting a war alone, because she had sent him away. "I hope you know," she whispered to the silent room, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I hope you know I didn't mean it. I didn't mean that I wanted you gone. I just wanted to be safe." Across town, Enzo sat in his office, the lights off, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Riverfront Warehouse, Dock 4, midnight, come alone, and we can end this. Or I release the full name and address of your little waitress to the Northside Hit Squad." It was Marco. Enzo stared at the message. He knew the warehouse. It was abandoned, isolated, a perfect kill box. He knew it was a trap. Marco would have gunmen in the rafters. He would have the Northside crew waiting. But he also knew Marco wasn't bluffing about the hit squad. If Enzo didn't show, Marco would unleash hell on Hannah, regardless of the marshals protecting her. Enzo stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He checked the clip in his handgun and slid it into the holster at the small of his back. He wasn't going to a peace meeting. He was going to his execution, or his brother's. He picked up his phone and sent one final message to Detective Morales. "He is at the Riverfront Warehouse. I am going in. Give me 10 minutes, then send everyone you have." Enzo walked out of his office into the cool night air, determined to end the war himself, one way or another. The vibration of the phone in Hannah's pocket was a ghostly buzz against her hip, startling her from her vigil by the window of the witness safe house. She pulled out the cheap prepaid device Enzo had given her weeks ago. The screen was cracked, but the message was clear. It was from Nico. "Riverfront Warehouse, Dock 4. He's walking into something bad. Northside is waiting." Hannah stared at the text. Nico never texted when he was supposed to be undercover. If he was sending this, it meant his cover was blown, and Enzo was walking into a trap with no backup. She glanced at the door. 2 federal marshals were stationed in the hallway, discussing a football game in low tones. They were waiting for orders that would come too late. Hannah grabbed her jacket. She did not think about the trial. She did not think about the danger. She only thought about the man who had walked into the dark for her. She waited until the marshals laughed at a joke, their attention momentarily drifting. With a silent prayer, she slipped out the back service entrance, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. She ran 3 blocks before she dared to slow down, her breath pluming in the cold night air. She caught the late-night crosstown bus, huddling in the back seat as the city blurred past. She clutched the phone tight, her knuckles white. replaying the self-defense lessons Enzo had taught her in the penthouse kitchen. Aim for the eyes, use your voice, distract and run. The riverfront was a graveyard of industry, silent and imposing. Hannah got off a block away from the warehouse district. She moved through the shadows, the smell of brackish water and diesel filling her nose. When she reached Dock 4, she saw Enzo's sedan parked haphazardly near the entrance. She crept toward the building, peering through a shattered window pane. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and dust motes dancing in the beams of portable work lights. Enzo stood in the center of the open floor. He was alone. Facing him was Marco. Flanked by 4 men Hannah recognized as soldiers from the North Side outfit. They were armed, their weapons held loosely but ready. You always were a fool. Enzo. Marco's voice echoed off the metal roof. You think you can walk in here and talk peace after you sold me out to the cops? I did not sell you out, Enzo said, his voice calm, devoid of fear. I tried to save the family from you. You are a cancer, Marco. You bring nothing but heat and blood. Marco laughed, a jagged sound. And you bring weakness. You let a girl tear us apart, a waitress. She's not just a waitress, Enzo said. She's the innocent person you dragged into our mess, and she is the reason I am done. She was leverage, Marco screamed, his composure cracking. That is all she was, nothing more. Did you really think I was going to let her go? I was never going to release her. Enzo. She was dead the moment I put her in that basement. Enzo's face hardened into a mask of pure disgust. The last shred of brotherly loyalty evaporated in that moment. Then you are finished, Enzo said quietly. You are not my brother. You are not a Valenti. You are just a thug with a death wish. Outside, Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs. Marco had never intended to let her live. The realization turned her blood to ice, but it also steeled her resolve. She pulled out her phone and dialed Detective Morales. Riverfront Warehouse, Dock 4. Hannah whispered urgently into the receiver the moment the line connected. It is a trap. Enzo is surrounded. You need to get here now. She hung up before Morales could ask questions. She checked the side door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, moving behind a stack of rotting shipping crates, her sneakers silent on the concrete floor. In the center of the room, the standoff escalated. Marco raised his gun, pointing it directly at Enzo's chest. I am going to finish this, Marco snarled. And when I am done with you, I am going to find your little victim girlfriend. I do not care how many marshals they put on her. I will find her. Enzo took a step forward. He did not look at the gun. He looked Marco in the eye. You will never touch her, Enzo said. If I have to die to make sure of that, then pull the trigger. But know that my death brings the entire department down on your head. Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. He was smiling. Hannah knew she had no choice. She took a breath, stepped out from behind the crates just enough to be seen, and screamed with everything she had. Marco! The sound tore through the warehouse. Marco spun around, startled by the ghost he thought he had already defeated. His gun wavered, turning toward Hannah. Enzo did not hesitate. In the split second, Marco looked away. Enzo launched himself forward. He tackled Marco around the waist, driving him backward. The gun went off, the shot going wild and sparking against the metal rafters. The 2 brothers hit the floor hard. It was not a graceful fight. It was a desperate, brutal scramble for control. Marco struck Enzo in the face with the butt of the gun. Enzo grunted but didn't let go, slamming Marco's wrist against the concrete until the weapon skittered away. The North Side men raised their weapons, unsure of a clean shot in the tangle of bodies. Enzo used his weight to shove Marco backward, driving him into a steel support beam with a sickening thud. Marco slumped, the wind knocked out of him. Enzo stumbled back, gasping, clutching his side where he had slammed against the edge of a crate. Blood trickled from a cut on his hairline, blinding him in one eye. Marco groaned, trying to push himself up. He looked up at Enzo. Hate pouring off him? I will burn it all down, Marco screamed, his voice echoing. I worked with the North Side outfit to kill you. I ordered the drive-by at the courthouse. I did it all, and I would do it again. Hannah was already moving. She held her phone up, The camera steady despite the tremors running through her hands. She captured every word, the confession, the admission of the alliance, the intent to kill. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder by the second. Blue and red lights flashed through the high windows, painting the warehouse in chaotic strokes of color. The North Side men, hearing the police, bolted for the rear exits, leaving Marco alone. Detective Morales and a SWAT team burst through the main doors, weapons drawn. "Drop it! Get on the ground!" Marco was hauled to his feet and cuffed, screaming obscenities as they dragged him away. He locked eyes with Hannah as he passed, but she didn't flinch. She just kept recording until he was gone. Then she lowered the phone. Enzo was leaning heavily against a wooden crate. He was breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs, blood staining his white shirt. He looked up as Hannah ran across the floor. "Enzo!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. She reached out, cupping his face with both hands. His skin was warm, slick with sweat and blood. Tears streamed down her face, blurring her vision. "You idiot," she sobbed, checking the wound on his head. "You absolute idiot. You walked in here alone. You told me never to go anywhere unsafe, and you walked right into a firing squad." Enzo looked at her. His eyes were hazy with pain, but when they focused on her face, they softened. He reached up, covering her hands with his own. "I had to," he rasped. It was the only way to draw him out. Hannah shook her head, a mixture of anger and overwhelming relief crashing over her. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. She pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes tight. "Don't you ever do that again," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave me." Enzo let out a long, shuddering breath. He winced as he shifted, pulling her gently into his lap on the cold, dirty floor. He held her close, one arm wrapping securely around her back, his other hand coming up to rest over her heart, feeling the frantic rhythm of her pulse. "I thought I would never see you again," he whispered into her hair. "When the gun went off, I thought that was it." He pulled back just enough to see her face. He used his thumb to wipe a tear from her cheek. Then he leaned in. He kissed her, deeply and tenderly, pouring all the fear and all the love of the last few weeks into the contact. It was a kiss of survival, of a promise kept. Around them, officers secured the scene, but they looked away, giving the couple a shred of privacy in the wreckage of the war they had just survived. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Hannah's video recording and Nico's testimony, the district attorney had Marco dead to rights. Enzo kept his word. He sat in an interrogation room with Morales and the federal prosecutors. He laid out the entire structure of the Valenti syndicate. He gave up the North Side Outfit's operations in the city. In exchange for his cooperation and a guilty plea to lesser charges of racketeering, he accepted a sentence of 5 years in a minimum security federal facility. The trial of Marco Valenti was the headline of the year. Hannah took the stand. She did not look at the floor. She looked directly at the man who had chained her in a basement, and she told the jury exactly what he had done. Her voice was clear. Her hand did not shake. The video of Marco's confession played on the courtroom screens. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Marco was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the gavel fell, Hannah looked across the courtroom gallery. Enzo was being led out by a bailiff to begin his own sentence. He stopped at the door. He looked back at her and gave a single, solemn nod. It was a goodbye, but it wasn't the end. 2 years and 8 months later. The autumn leaves were turning gold on the streets of the quiet Eastport neighborhood where Hannah now lived. It was a modest walk-up, far from the shadows of the industrial district. Hannah sat on her couch, reviewing case files. She worked as a counselor now at a center for trauma survivors. She used her own scars to help others find their way out of the dark. It was heavy work, but it was good work. A soft knock on her door broke her concentration. She frowned, checking the time. It was 7 in the evening. She wasn't expecting anyone. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Her breath hitched in her throat. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers suddenly clumsy. She swung the door open. Enzo stood in the hallway. He looked different. The expensive Italian suits were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. His hair was a little longer, touched with gray at the temples. He looked older, humbled by time and confinement, but his eyes were the same, dark, intense, and fixed on her. He was holding a brown paper bag. The grease stains on the bottom were unmistakable. "I went by the diner," Enzo said, his voice rough with emotion. "Pete said you liked the cheeseburger with extra pickles." Hannah stared at him. She stared at the bag, then she looked back at his face, and a rush of old feelings and new hope flooded her chest, warm and undeniable. "You are out," she whispered. "Parole," Enzo said. "Good behavior. I run a security consulting firm now. Legitimate, boring. I pay my taxes." He hesitated, shifting his weight. "I didn't know if I should come, but I promised you I would keep you safe. I wanted to make sure." Hannah didn't let him finish. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, Enzo." They sat on her couch, the takeout bag sitting unopened on the coffee table. They talked for hours. They talked about his time in prison, about the quiet brutality of it. They talked about her therapy, about the nights she still woke up checking the locks. They talked about guilt, his for the past, hers for the time she spent hating him. They talked about forgiveness. "I still love you," Hannah admitted quietly, looking down at her hands. "I never stopped. But I need to know that this life, your new life, is real. I need to know I am safe with you." Enzo reached out and took her hand. His palm was rougher than she remembered, calloused from work, but his touch was just as gentle. "I am done with the darkness, Hannah," he vowed. "All I want is a life where you never have to look over your shoulder again, a life where the only time your heart races is because I am kissing you." Hannah looked at him, and she believed him. Later. The city lights outside were calm, a soft glow against the window pane. They lay side by side on the couch, wrapped in a shared blanket. Hannah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. His arm was wrapped securely around her waist, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She shifted, lifting her head to look at him. Enzo smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. He leaned up and kissed her, slow and full of a feeling that had survived war and prison and time. He pulled back slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Don't move," he murmured, the old words now a promise of peace rather than protection. "You're safe now." Hannah smiled, her fingers interlacing with his over her heart. She shook her head softly. "We're safe now. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of danger, redemption, and love, and I hope you enjoyed every moment of it. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment down below and tell me your country or city. If you enjoyed Hannah and Enzo's story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section. I read every single one. Until next time.